So I want to take you back to the year 1956. 1956, New South Wales, Australia. The city government decided that it was time to build an opera house at Bennelong Point in the Sydney Harbor. So they let people around the world know, they sent out notices that they were looking for proposals from architects for this new opera house. Well, over 220 proposals came in from over 28 different countries. The committee met and began to vet them, go through them one at a time. There was a lot there. Now, the story goes that one of their most outstanding architects, members of the committee, showed up late. When he showed up late and kind of listened to what they were doing, he went over and he began to rifle through the proposals that they had already gone through. And he pulled one out, opened it, and looked at it. And according to the Opera House website, he said, "This is obviously the best design here." It was number 218 from a Danish architect named Jørn Utzon. Well, that was the one that won the day. Because of that, today, if you go to Sydney Harbor, you'll see a building. I want to read some of the descriptions from different sources that have to say something about what this building is. As I read these, you'll see some of the pictures of the building on the screen. A major cultural institution, an iconic sculptural landmark, a masterpiece of modern architecture, one of the great buildings of the world, a controversial design, iconic, legendary. Utzon would say that he was inspired by seashells and by natural forms. So he came and helped to oversee the building of the Sydney Opera House. That's to be expected, the pouring of the foundation, the building of the walls, a bit of the infrastructure, and especially coming up with some way to design and to build those iconic sails. But then something rather dramatic happened. Before it was finished, before the interior work had been done, before all the different glass walls were in place, before the designs had been carried out for what was going on inside of the building, Utzon left the project, just left, went back home, and never returned. Never returned and saw the building in its completed state. The question is, why? That's the obvious question. Why? You've designed it. You've put your passion into it, your heart into it, your vision, your dream. You've come. You've overseen much of the building. Why did you leave? So Utzon left because they were trying to depart from the structure. They were going to do some pieces differently that they thought worked better. And it became enough of an issue that he ultimately said, if you're going to change it, I'm leaving. And he left and never returned. Now, it's tempting to say, well, he's just an eccentric architect. He's full of himself. He's egocentric. He's not willing to work with other people. I mean, there are different ways you could say it. And who knows, maybe some of those were partially correct. But none of them gets at the core of what the issue was. The issue was simply this. Utzon was saying, this is me. I have put my life, my dream, my vision, my heart into this. It has been drawn and depicted in this way for very specific reasons that are a part of who I am. And if you start changing that, it violates the sense of self, the dream that I had for this place. Now, you can decide what you want to about Jørn Utzon. You can say he was egotistical. He was egocentric. But part of me understands that if there's something that you or that I am putting out here to say, this represents a core part of me, and then someone starts saying, well, how about you change this and change that? Don't put that there. Let's do this differently. That there is something within you, something within me that says, no. That's not representative of who I am. I want to talk with you in this series about a structure. like the Sydney Opera House, certain ways, but very different in others. Because this structure is a set of beliefs, doctrines we normally call them, set of beliefs which we affirm are true about God, life, and the world. A doctrinal structure. Now, this is not just a doctrinal structure of the larger Christian world. We've done parts of that over the years. In this case, we're going to be looking specifically and pointedly at some of the key elements of Seventh-day Adventist belief that form a certain kind of structure that also has a designer that is seeking to be represented in that structure. Our question is going to be, is that structure accurately representing that designer? Now understand, this series is not apologetic in nature. I'm not trying to convince you of something or to stand for something and say, this is the way you must see it. There's a place for apologetics, but not in this series. In this series, our question is to try to get to the designer behind the structure and say, who is that designer? And what does this element of the structure tell us about that designer? Now, every sermon, every series has a genesis at some point. The idea for this came in a conversation with Jesse, Pastor Jesse. Jesse and a small group of other young adult pastors across North America were talking about Seventh-day Adventism and the fact that we haven't always done a good job of telling a good or a better story about Adventism. Some of us come with stories of a damaged experience, heavily legalistic, heavy on shame and fear. And these are Jesse's words, at the heart of Adventism, there's a God of love. So we want to look at that structure and ask, is that true? So we have to begin with God. That's where it has to start. So to begin this series, we go to the desert. Sunrise in the desert, a barren, desolate, devastated piece of real estate. The sun rises on a scene where Moses and the people of Israel are in trouble. I mean, they're in what the country song called trouble, all caps, trouble. The reason for that is it hasn't been long, not too long ago, when they received the 10 Commandments from God, the finger of God itself, says the text, and Moses brings that down the mountain only to find the people dancing around the golden calf. There is an ire that rises up within Moses that is so intense that he takes those tablets, throws them, and smashes them to smithereens. That's the backdrop. The text we come to today, Exodus 34, still in the desert, not that long later, is God telling Moses, come back up the mountain. I'm going to give you another set of tables because you broke the first ones. I'm going to give you another one. And we're going to go at this again. Now, that's a passage that has been really important for Adventists because of different reasons, not the least of which, at the heart of that Decalogue are words that say, remember. Remember the Sabbath, one of the marks of our identity. So this has been an important passage to us. What will it tell us about God? Exodus 34, the Lord said to Moses, chisel out 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and I will write on them the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready in the morning and then come up on Mount Sinai. Present yourself to me there on the top of the mountain. No one is to come with you or be seen anywhere on the mountain. Not even the flocks and herds may graze in front of the mountain. So Moses chiseled out 2 stone tablets like the first ones and went up on Mount Sinai early in the morning as the Lord had commanded him. And he carried the 2 stone tablets in his hands. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. That word there in the Hebrew is Yahweh. Proclaimed his name, Yahweh. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Moses bowed to the ground at once and worshiped. God is a lopsided God. I borrow that term from the New Testament scholar William Webb. God is a lopsided God. Now, some ask, what do you mean by lopsided? So I thought, I ought to get a definition of that. So I asked my friend AI, what is lopsided? And here's what he said. He said, lopsided means leaning or heavier on one side, lacking balance, symmetry, or proportion. It describes something unevenly weighted or biased, either literally or figuratively. Lopsided, like the table you sat at the restaurant this week. One leg shorter than the other three. And every couple of moments, suddenly your drink is about to spill because it's lopsided. That's what it means, lopsided. God is a lopsided God, says William Webb. I'm borrowing that term from him. So we begin with God, trying to understand what that means and how. If we are to ask what this structure of our beliefs about God tells us about him, we have to first ask, who is this God? And that's core to Adventism. In fact, these are the words of Ellen White, one of our key founders. Some of you may remember these words. It is the darkness of misapprehension of God that is enshrouding the world, covering the world. People are losing their knowledge of his character. It has been misunderstood and misrepresented. At this time, a message from God is to be proclaimed, a message illuminating in its influence and saving in its power. His character is to be made known. Into the darkness of the world is to be shed the light of his glory, the light of his goodness, mercy, and truth. The last rays of merciful light, the last message of mercy to be given to the world is a revelation of his character of love. Has the world become a darker place? Absolutely. Are there reasons for fear and concern? No doubt. Is every time we click on a website or look at Instagram or even Facebook, are we seeing things that strike fear and terror to the hearts of readers and elicit anger about what's going on in the world? All of that is real. And into that come these words written by Ellen White. Into that world, the most important message, the last message, is what? God is love. A representation, an accurate representation of his character. That's the message. And we come along and say, well, God is lopsided. So what does that mean? What did Webb mean by that? Well, I want to read you a couple of statements from William Webb. And they are about the passage we read a couple of moments ago, Exodus 34. They're about God's self-revelation to Moses. Here's the first one. The portrait of God as markedly weighted toward love and forgiveness, far more so than toward justice or punishment in Exodus 34, offers Christians tremendous insights into Yahweh. In two ways, Yahweh's character and disposition, his glory, lean significantly in one direction compared to another. The first sense of disproportionate weighting can be seen in the declaration of Yahweh's name and reputation being composed of an unequal grouping of attributes. with the sevenfold description of Yahweh. In other words, it gives 7 descriptions of Yahweh in that passage. 6 attributes are contrasted with 1 attribute. So, simple graph you'll see on the screen tells us that on one side are these 6 attributes. He's compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, and forgiving. 6 attributes of the 7. That's who God is. Strongly weighted in that direction. But then follow these words about thousands. What do you mean thousands? Well, from a commentary that helps Bible translators tease out the nuances of the language comes this statement: keeping steadfast love for thousands, literally guarding chesed, meaning steadfast love for thousands. Today's English version and the contemporary English version interpret this as keeping promises. But it is more likely that Yahweh is saying, I will keep on loving my people for thousands of generations. In other words, basically forever. So on one side of that diagram, where Yahweh is divulging, disclosing, revealing his heart to us, we have 6 attributes of mercy and goodness and graciousness and faithfulness, and then a statement that says, I will keep on loving you for thousands and thousands of generations. That's one way, one side, 6-fold and thousands. But there's another side to that graph, which you'll see now on the screen. The other side in his description has punishing, which I would point out to you is a culturally conditioned word. Did people 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago punish their kids differently than we do today? You better believe it. It's a culturally conditioned word that is simply saying there are boundaries and there are consequences. That's the other side, 6-1. And then from the thousands, we go to 3 or 4. So that on the other side of that equation, God is saying, I'm a God who is full of this for thousands, forever. But on this side, I'm a God also who honors boundaries and realizes that consequences will play themselves out over 3 or 4 generations. In other words, what you're doing now will affect your kids and grandkids. That's the comparison. The second Webb quote. The ratio of clustered attributes is a lopsided 6-1. However, the imbalanced weight of God's character or attributes becomes far more disproportional once we catch another contrasting feature within this Exodus text. Yahweh is predisposed toward the 6-fold cluster on the left to the 1,000th generation compared with only the 3rd or 4th generation on the right column. It's not our objective here to address the specific intergenerational aspects of this text. Rather, our point is that whatever the intergenerational meaning, the 1,000-to-4 ratio, like the 6-to-1 ratio, clearly conveys a sense of Yahweh's greater disposition toward the 6-fold attributes compared with enacting punishment. One could say that Yahweh is predisposed toward love and forgiveness in lavish proportions compared with his very restricted desire to enact justice or punishment. Yahweh is a profoundly gracious God. I want to remind you where we're reading this. We're not reading this in one of the Gospels in the ministry of Jesus. We're reading this in the Old Testament, almost as deep into the Old Testament as you can get. We're reading this in the context of a people who has been rebellious. We're reading this in the context of the giving of the law. And in that context, Yahweh is essentially saying, I am infinitely weighted in this direction. While I keep saying there's got to be justice, there have to be boundaries, there will come consequences, but he just keeps reverting to this lopsided direction of mercy and grace. Now, do other passages bear that out? I mean, go back to the beginning. Let's go back to Genesis. There's a text in Genesis. When I was growing up, everybody read the King James Version, so I kind of remembered in the King James Version. There's this text in Genesis where God says to Adam and Eve, don't eat of that tree. Don't eat of the fruit of that tree. And if you eat of the fruit of that tree, and this is more King James language, the day in which thou eatest thereof, thou shalt die. The day in which thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Once I started thinking about the Bible, that started puzzling me because I thought they didn't die on the day they ate of it. If you read that text literally, it's like take a bite, history, done. Didn't happen. So as I got even older and began to wonder why, so I started looking at scholars. What do scholars say about that? One of the most common statements is it didn't mean that that day they would fully die, but that the process of dying would begin the day they ate. That's defensible, I think. And then I encountered Fred Craddock. And here's how Fred Craddock spoke of it. God's like a parent. You do that, I'll ground you for 2 years. Just try me. Go ahead, try me. Ground you for 2 years. And then they do it. And you're like, and so Craddock says, here's God. On the day you eat of that, you're going to die. And then he said, did you eat it? Yeah, you ate it? Oh. Well, you can't stay here. You got to at least go out. So he sends them out because he's so lopsided in the direction of grace and mercy. Jonah, remember him? Jonah has been called the reluctant prophet. That is a misnomer if I ever heard one. There was no reluctance about it. If Jonah were standing right here and this was his world and the directions, God says to him, I want you to go to Nineveh, which is north, northeast, east, northeast. I want you to go to Nineveh and preach. You know what Jonah does? He goes to Tarshish, which is in that direction, as fast as he can get there. There's nothing reluctant about that. He's like, I want you to go here. Okay, off I go in that direction. And our question is, why is he not wanting to go to Nineveh and preach? The reason is simple. He knows God is lopsided. Understand, the ancient Assyrians were the fiercest warriors in the world of their day. Fierce. The rest of the ancient Near Eastern world basically lived in terror of the ancient Assyrians. I was reading again, I've read it on many occasions before, reading again this week, just thinking, okay, this is really how bad they were. Reading again, and I'll spare you the details in an intergenerational worship service, but just trust me, if you go look up what they did to their enemies, horrific things. But that's not what put Jonah off. What put Jonah off was saying, okay, I'm going to go preach to them, and they're going to say sorry, and you're going to say you're forgiven. Do you have any idea how that's going to play in Peoria? When I get back home, and they say, did you have an evangelistic series in Nineveh? And I'll have to say yes. What happened? God forgave them all. They are going to kill me back home. Are you kidding? There's no way. And so he takes off. And God says, John, come back here. And he says, no, you're going to preach to the Ninevites. So he sends him. And Jonah goes in with a message with no ifs, ands, or buts, nothing. 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown, destroyed, lit up. The 40 days pass, and at the end of the book, there he is. It's like he's sitting on a mountainside, just overlooked, perfect place for 4th of July, waiting for the fireworks. And they don't fall. And it just ticks him off. He's just angry. And God comes to him and says, you mad, bro? And he says, no, I'm furious. Why are you so mad? Because This is exactly why I didn't want to come here. I preached, they repented, and you forgave them. I did not want that to happen. These are enemies. And God says, Jonah, there are tens of thousands of my children in this city. And that's where the book ends. Jonah just livid. And God trying to say, in the midst of tilting over time and again, they're my kids too, Jonah. Our lopsided God. Or what about the ministry of Jesus? Teaching in the temple. They drag her in and throw her half clothed at his feet. We caught her in flagrante delicto, red-handed, in the act. I think it's in there somewhere, maybe in the Greek. I think Jesus must have said, doesn't it take two to tango? We're talking about her. What do you say? Now, we're so well acquainted with his words. Let the one without sin cast the first stone. One New Testament scholar says, an argument can be made, a reasonable argument can be made from the text, the original, that could also be translated, let the one who has never desired to do what she has done, let that one cast the first stone. And that clears the place. Has no one condemned you? No one, Lord. I don't either. Go and live a new life. Lopsided. The law clearly said, and Jesus said. Now, I just want to remind you, this text is in Exodus. It's tempting to say, well, this approach, this heart of God, this character began with Jesus. Exodus. Rebellion, broken law, broken commandments, and God's lopsided nature comes out. Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, commenting on that Exodus passage, says this: in the present state of Israel's sorrow and subdued spirit, because of what had happened with the golden calf, something additional was needed to impart to them hope and assurance. Of itself, the law could never be merciful and gracious. Its sole stress was upon rectitude. There was a needed supplementary revelation of the gracious character of God to Moses. In the revelation of the character of God to Moses, Sinai proclaims not only the divine law, but also divine grace. This fact proves unfounded the popular notion that Sinai stands for justice but not mercy. Sinai's exalted proclamation of grace by no means annulled the law and thwarted divine justice. Rather, it clarified the relationship of each to the other. Because of that, I just want to say amen, amen, and amen to the old Puritan prayer. I am always going into the far country and returning as a prodigal, and thou art always bringing forth the best robe. Our lopsided God. Because of that, I would begin this series by saying, our God is innately and inherently tilting toward mercy. Innately, because that's inborn, that's part of his character, his person, who he is. He's innately, but inherently, it doesn't stop. It just keeps going in that direction. Our God innately and inherently tilts toward mercy. So, 2 years ago, my wife and I had the privilege of being in Sydney. We traversed the Sydney Harbor Bridge. And there from that vantage point, we could see the Sydney Opera House down below. We took this picture of the Sydney Opera House. I was looking at it again this week. And I was just taking in the beauty of the structure, the way the sails lean into ships and seas, the magnificence. And I thought about Jörn Utzon saying, this is a depiction of me, of my dream, of my heart. And I thought, well, who knows? Maybe I would have left too if that got compromised. I don't know. You'll have to decide about that. But what I will tell you is this. There is another structure, elements of which we're going to examine that say we're showing who the designer is. I just want to do everything I can to make sure I understand the designer's dream and will and heart and mind correctly. So for that reason, I invite you on this journey into the lopsided God of Adventism as we seek to tell a better story. A story that says at the heart of Adventism is a God of love.